Welcome to Bianchi Law Talk. Every Sunday at 10:30, I pick a topic that people are indicating that they're interested in listening to and do an informal video giving a legal perspective from the prosecutor's background, defense lawyer's background. And this week, we're going to do domestic violence. It's something that is out there all the time that we deal with as prosecutors and defense lawyers. The Bianchi Law Group, my partner, David Bruno, and myself handle many cases on behalf of family law attorneys. So people are very confused when they're either a victim of domestic violence or even a defendant in a domestic violence case as to what is going on, because it's a very big area of law. There's lots of moving pieces and there's lots of legal issues at play. But essentially what happens is there are certain categories of offenses called predicate offenses. And if you are a person who is subject to a domestic violence action, it has to fit within one of these categories. And those categories are homicide, assault, terroristic threats, kidnapping, criminal restraint, false imprisonment, sexual assault, criminal sexual contact, lewdness, criminal mischief, burglary, criminal trespass, harassment, and stalking. In truth, the assault, terroristic threats, harassment, and stalking make up probably a bulk of the domestic violence complaints. We've previously done videos informally on harassment and stalking, and you know how it can be widely interpreted. But let's also talk about how it is that you can be a victim, or what is a victim under the law, because not just anybody can file a domestic violence action. You have to be a victim as defined by the law, and that is a current or former spouse, that you have a current or former household member, that you have or are expecting a child, that you have or had a dating relationship. So you have to fit within one of those categories in order to trigger the domestic violence law. And then you have to have committed one of those predicate offenses that I read to you. And if you did, then there are two basic proceedings that are occurring at one time. The first is the domestic violence complaint, or the temporary restraining order that can be issued by the police or at the courthouse. And that essentially is a restraining order that separates the parties from one another and basically tells the person who is alleged to have done something wrong that if you have any contact, even contact through third parties or intermediaries or through social media, then you can be in violation of the temporary restraining order. And then there's a bunch of other conditions. For example, you can't go to the household. The judge may order that you be a certain distance away from an individual. And there's a number of guns and weapons can be taken. There's a number of criteria on a form that the judge would check off as to what the judge feels is appropriate in order to keep the alleged victim safe until a full hearing can be done. That's called a temporary restraining order. And if you violate that restraining order, it becomes another criminal charge that is contempt of court potentially that you could face. Now, remember, a temporary restraining order and a final restraining order are not criminal. This is not handled in the criminal courts. This is handled in the family parts in most jurisdictions, and certainly in New Jersey. It's a civil proceeding. So you go there eventually to a hearing. Evidence is put on. It's very informal. It's always best to have a lawyer present with you. And the judge is going to make a determination based upon the evidence presented by a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt, whether or not an act of domestic violence occurred. One of those offenses I listed before, and one of those categories of people that are subject to protection under the domestic violence statute. If the judge finds that, then the judge will issue, if they also find that the person is in need of restraints to stop continued harassment or continued bad behavior, a final restraining order. And the final restraining order will be much more specific about what the court finds is needed for the protection of the victim of domestic violence. So that's all handled in the family division. But as you know, those laws that I read to you that constitute domestic violence, that is homicide, assault, terroristic threats, harassment, stalking, sexual contact, those are also criminal offenses as well. So at the same time that you have a domestic violence temporary restraining order filed against you, you probably will be defending yourself either in municipal court or in superior court for the underlying predicate offense that brought you to the domestic violence court in the first place, if you get that. So you will actually be defending yourself if you've been charged against the restraining order in family court and potentially municipal court and criminal court on the underlying predicate offense. So it's a two-front battle that the defendant has to overcome. And of course, in the criminal court, there you're entitled to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. and you're entitled to all the protections of a criminal defendant. So it could very well be that you could be found not guilty of the underlying predicate offense in criminal court, yet based on the preponderance of evidence standard in the civil context in the family court, actually have a final restraining order issued against you. So that is the basics of the domestic violence law. And I just wanted to also tell you that if you have a violation of that restraining order, you can have some serious consequences that can occur with respect to this. So listen, I hope this video was helpful. We'd like to answer your questions. I appreciate all of you that support the Bianchi Law Talk fan page on Facebook, as well as the YouTube subscribers. Please subscribe to my YouTube. Please share these messages out if you find them helpful. I have them all on my YouTube, and of course, they're all on the Bianchi Law Talk fan page. And I have links below for each of those, as well as a link below to the Division of Criminal Justice explanation more fully of the domestic violence laws should you or someone that you know need the court's protection. Thanks, and we'll see you again Sunday next week at 10:30 a.m. on the Bianchi Law Talk Facebook fan page. Stay cool out there, folks. This is Pensacola hot here.